Hi, I'm Susan Shaner with Community Forum, and I'm your host today. And I have the great pleasure to have with me Sharon Dornfeld, who is running for Probate Judge in the 45th District of Connecticut. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
45th District, now that's Richfield, Bethel, Newtown.
And Reading.
And Reading, okay. Now, we have a lot of people focused on the presidential election, and not as many people focused on the election for probate judge. Now, why should people be interested in this?
You know, it does interest me that people seem less focused on the down ticket, if you will, the under ticket candidates in the races, because in terms of the actual direct impact of government on individuals' lives, it's the local folks who have the most immediate impact and the most are in a position for one to be able to directly influence them and contact them and talk with them about the issues, ask questions, look for help from the local folks. Most people will probably not be calling up anybody in the White House in the future, but you might call your state rep, you might call your judge of probate, you might find yourself in with some of these folks, and it's really almost more government at the retail level, if you will.
Yeah. So, so what is the probate court all about?
Well, I think most people, when they think about probate, which often they try to avoid, really think of it in the context of someone has passed away and their estate needs to be taken care of. Often there's a will.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's not a will. Either way, you end up in probate court. The court makes sure that the heirs are identified, the bills are paid, the estate is distributed in accordance with the decedent's wishes, assuming there's a will, or according to statute if there's no will. And you know, if there's a challenge to the validity of the will, that happens in probate. You have trouble finding heirs, or there's a dispute over who the heirs are.
But it's not just wills, right? I mean, I remember. So when I got married, my husband wanted to hyphenate his name too, which was very unusual at the time. This was in the early '80s. I mean, early '90s, excuse me. And he wanted to hyphenate his name, and nobody knew what we should do, because when you're a woman and you get married, you just go to Social Security, you do whatever you want to do. Nobody says anything.
Sure.
And we asked all the way up to Hartford in the court system, and they said, we don't know. There was like no precedence. And then somebody said, well, if he owns property, maybe. So basically, what we were told is that he had to petition the probate court.
Yes.
Hey, if I'm recalling correctly, I think he paid like $100 and sit before the judge and explain why he wanted to hyphenate his name.
Sure.
And I thought, oh my gosh, this is so, a woman doesn't have to do that.
Well, as I said, most people, if they think of probate court, all think of estates.
Yeah.
But that's really only about half of a probate court's business. The other half are very personal type things like changes of name.
Yeah.
There's a lot of business involving children. Guardianships, for example, grandparents caring for grandchildren. We see a lot of that, unfortunately, where the parents, for whatever reason, are passed away or somehow otherwise capable of caring for the kids. Someone has to take care of them. You see the permission slips come home from school, it asks for the signature of a parent or guardian. You have to become a guardian to have the authority to enroll the kids in school or to take them to the doctor and that sort of thing. Probate courts do that. Elderly or disabled people who really aren't able to manage their own affairs financially or their personal affairs really need someone who has the authority to do that for them. Probate courts do that. Intellectually disabled young people, as they're approaching 18. Yeah. Someone needs to be in a position to really make the decisions and make sure they're appropriately cared for. Probate courts do that. Changes of name, you've already mentioned. Very sadly, involuntary commitments for somebody who's psychiatrically disabled or severely impacted by substance abuse.
So when you're talking about government, retail government in a way, that's what you mentioned at the beginning, this really is, I mean, these are very personal issues that affect people. So if somebody heads on down to the probate court, so where's the one?
For our district, it's physically located in the Bethel Municipal Center.
Okay. So somebody heads on down there, what can they expect?
Well, I say we because I practice in that court, so I'm very familiar with it. And I live in the district. It is an office on the second floor of the Bethel Municipal Center. There is a staff of 4 clerks to assist folks. They can't give legal advice, but they can assist you in figuring out what the right application would be, perhaps help you fill it out, schedule appointments for hearings with the court, the judges in the court. There are some things that are pretty much handled administratively. A lot of the estate stuff is handled administratively. You fill out the right forms and do the accountings, and they double check that it's all done properly.
If you had any questions, you could go down there and they could help you figure out how to navigate it.
Yes, again, they can't give you legal advice, but they can help you with the procedural aspects.
So you're saying I mean, obviously you're running for probate judge, right?
Correct.
So, and you said, well, I deal with those courts a lot. So tell our audience what your background is and what qualifies you for this position. Like, what do we want to look for in a probate judge?
Well, obviously, the statute requires that a probate judge be a lawyer now. That wasn't always true.
And why did that change?
Well, I think as the issues have become more sophisticated, people have become more sophisticated, the problems have become more difficult. In 2009, the legislature decided that it was no longer really feasible to have lay probate judges. And there had been lay probate judges since the time probate matters started in Connecticut in 1616. There are very few left, but they eliminated that. So I'm a lawyer. I live in the district. I'm an elector of the district, and I am under 70. So I have met the legal requirements. But in terms of
you have to be under 70?
You have to be under 70. Our state constitution requires that all judges must be under 70.
Did not know that.
Yep.
Because they assume that anybody over 70 is not going to...
Superior Court judges may become what are called judge trial referees, and nearly all of them do, the day after they become 70 and continue with most of the same authority that they have up to that point, but technically they are no longer judges.
Oh.
Again, this is one of those interesting things where 70, in 1818, when the state constitution decided that that was the right age, is no longer 70.
Because people didn't that long back then.
Sure.
So they probably just assumed, okay, so it was like forced retirement.
Something like that, yeah. If you manage to make it to 70, good luck. But
so why do you think is it, you said things got a lot more complex, is it because more people are protesting things? I mean, we live in a litigious society.
Well, I'm sure that that's part of it, but I think also there was a generalized concern that lay judges may not be familiar with a lot of the concepts of due process, for example, and evidentiary rules. Now, everything is somewhat more relaxed in a probate court. The probate courts have historically been places where people didn't always feel the need to come in with lawyers. The rules of evidence are relaxed, procedure is somewhat relaxed. The judge doesn't wear the robe and sit on a high bench. Yeah. It's usually a conference room type of situation. The judge is at a desk at one end and everyone else sits around a conference table. And it's designed to, because these are such personal issues, it's really designed for folks to have a little bit more level of comfort, I think, in discussing these issues and working things out. So going back to your question of what qualifies someone, I think one of the most important aspects of a judge is someone who is able to listen, able to be approachable, that people feel that they've been heard, are able to feel they've been heard, they've gotten a fair shake from someone who really cares about their issues.
So now what differentiates you? Now you're running against a couple people.
2 people,
yeah.
Yes. There's a Republican candidate.
Yep.
Actually, there are 2 Republican candidates, but one is running as a petitioning candidate who did not qualify for the primary, collected some signatures, and will now be shown on the ballot as a petitioning candidate. A number of things, I think. In terms of my background, the Republican candidate was a former probate judge before the consolidation in the town of Bethel. And, obviously he's been a judge and can bring that experience. But, he was a judge for approximately 20 years. And while he was a judge, I was actually out doing the work that he appointed people to do. And I think that gives me a different and, I would say, clearer perspective on what should be done in taking care of people how it should be done, and frankly how I would want it done if I were the person who was being conserved, or it was my child or grandchild who was under a guardianship, and or my relative, and I think that brings me a perspective that other folks don't have. I have extensive training in mediation that the other folks don't have, and there's been a real push over the years to try and resolve things more amicably. It's very difficult when it's in an adversarial situation.
Yeah. Who wins, the lawyers?
Typically family members.
It's like
not that I'm opposed to lawyers.
I'm sorry,
but
the bills get racked up. I mean,
and it's a shame because these are family issues that we're dealing with, and it destroys families in some cases. And to the extent that that can be avoided, that's I think desirable. I am running as a self-funded candidate. The other two are not. And I want to be clear, there's nothing illegal or unethical about raising money, but it just feels like something I want to avoid. I would never want to be in a position as a judge where anyone in my court was, if I should be so fortunate to be elected, that anyone in my court wondered if the other person had made a donation and it might make a difference for me. And so it just doesn't feel like the kind of judge I like to be. And so I failed to be independently wealthy, which was clearly an error on my part. But I'd rather do it this way. So that's a difference. I also think that I think I may be the only one of the candidates who would do this full time. I would close my office. I would close my practice.
Well, so tell us. So you've had your own law practice for.
Oh, I've been practicing for 33 years. I was with a firm for 5, so for 28 years I've been a sole practitioner.
And so, and the focus of your practice has been?
Focus of my practice has been representing typically kids and the elderly who need care. Much of that work has been done in the Superior Court, but in every case I'm appointed by a judge, either a probate judge or a juvenile court judge or a Superior Court judge, to represent the interests of someone who needs to be taken care of. And that's the type of practice I have wanted to do. I've done it for many years now.
Yeah, how did you come to that? It's very specialized.
Interestingly enough, I came through it through probate. When I was a very young lawyer with the firm, my firm did some probate litigation, and because I was a litigator with the firm, I sort of would have those files end up on my desk, and probate judges at the time sort of figured out I was new in town and was interested in this sort of thing and started appointing me, and the procedures were all different then. Somehow some of those cases appeals from probate court end up in juvenile court regarding children, and juvenile court judges decided that they would start appointing me, and from there it ended up going into the family court. So in contested custody cases, neglect and abuse cases, guardianship cases, contested terminations in the probate court, I started receiving those appointments, and what I found was it was both very satisfying emotionally, if you will, in terms of feeling like I was making a difference, but also legally. It was a very developing area of the law. It still is in many respects.
But those stories, some of those cases must have been heart-wrenching. I mean, so...
They are, often.
Some awful cases. I mean, how do you...
Well,
and I Googled you, and up comes some, obviously, I know you can't talk about specific cases, but up comes some people who are not happy about how things turned out.
Well...
So what do you say to that? I mean, people have some awful things to say about you because they didn't like how it transpired.
That's true. In every one of these contested cases, somebody walks away feeling like they lost, and they often assign some of the blame to the person who's representing the child's interests, who would be me in those cases.
Right.
Interestingly enough, some of the stuff you Googled are from people who I've never met and in whose cases I've never been involved. But because I have been very active in this area of practice and I've been pretty visible on a statewide level doing it, and because social media, in my view, is not necessarily an improvement on civilization, they found each other and they...
So anybody can say anything about you, and people don't check their facts.
And very unfortunately, a couple of cases in which I was involved, one one of the parties or the other went to the press with a very one-sided view of what was going on. And because in probate court these types of matters are sealed, but in any court, ethically, I am not allowed to discuss any of the specifics of the cases.
Yeah.
There is only a one-sided, not necessarily accurate version of what was going on. So what I would say is, in its kindest light, people's emotions are overwhelming when it's their family members, and it may cloud their judgment, and it may cloud their objectivity and ability to really understand what's going on. And I guess I would leave it at their kindest light, kindest light, other than to say there is always another side to the story, which simply can't be discussed publicly.
Oh, that must be so tough.
There are days that I would just love to tell the story.
That must be so tough. So you said that you really find it very rewarding because you feel like you're making a difference.
There are kids where I know, either because I followed the kids, or sometimes the kids grow up and come back, or I will have an opportunity to bump into a parent, and where I know it has made a huge difference. And that's great. And one of the reasons, on those very difficult cases where you can sort of manage the horror, if you will, about what's going on with the kids, is because I'm in a position to do something about it often. Yeah. It's not just sitting around and wringing my hands and feeling horrible about what's happening. I can get in there and try and influence the situation in a way that will help the child. Yeah. And I don't always come away feeling like, I've been successful, but at least I'm in an opportunity to try. Yeah,
I was going to say, what's been some of your greatest challenge with the work?
Greatest challenges. Well, for some of the cases, for example, in some of the probate cases, there's a real limit on resources. For some of the disabled folks, it's very difficult to find placements for them, or really appropriate level of care or funding to take care of that. And if it's difficult for me, I try and imagine what it's like for the families who are struggling with this, and that's just distressing to me. Yeah. The cases I find most difficult are the ones that don't resolve. So I've been involved in some cases for 15 years. The kids were very young when I become involved, and they work their way up eventually to 18 and age out. But for the whole childhood, their parents are fighting. They cannot accept that the fight, the conflict, is actually more damaging to the children than whatever the orders are. Yeah. And no amount of education, persuasion, lack of success in a courtroom will do that. And I find those are the ones that keep me awake at night. I can't figure out how to get the kids out of it because, of course, people have a right of access to the courts, and you can't tell them they can't go to court.
So you've been really, boots on the ground, lawyer in the trenches, and you want this role of being the probate judge. So very different kind of role than being the lawyer. So what are your strengths to bring to the table, and where do you think you might be challenged? Well,
it's actually less different than you would think, because representing the kids, representing the elderly person, representing the disabled person, I have always been in a position where I talk to both sides. I hear both sides of the story, as a judge would. And I have been involved frequently in what are in the business is referred to as quasi-judicial roles. I have been an attorney trial referee appointed by the judges for many years, hearing typically contracts cases, for example, but in the role of essentially the judge, making decisions on evidence, hearing, testimony, receiving documents and all that sort of thing, writing decisions. I've also served as a special master for years in typically custody cases, similar types of things. You hear both people, ultimately you make and you get all the other information, and you ultimately make recommendations, which very often are the basis for the folks reaching an agreement. Oddly, I have for 28 years served as the Parking Violations Appeals Hearing Officer for the town of Ridgefield.
Okay, that's a niche.
You get a parking ticket in Ridgefield and you're unhappy, you come see me, which is obviously on a very, very low level, but it's still a quasi-judicial kind of situation. So I do have that background and experience. And I think, you know, as a very active litigator over many years, I've hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases in the Superior Court, Probate Court,
so let me ask you this.
Appellate Court, Supreme Court.
So, sorry to interrupt you, but so what is really the difference between electing somebody who is a Democrat versus a Republican in this role?
None, I would hope.
Like how would they judge differently?
Not at all, I would hope.
Okay.
You know, judge, particularly at this level.
Yeah.
You know, maybe if you get up into the appellate or Supreme Court on the state or the federal level, there may be some policy considerations that come into their decisions. That's always sort of an issue with, for example, the Senate interviewing this, you know, the Supreme Court candidates and that sort of thing. But certainly at the judge of probate level, nothing should happen other than you find the facts as they are presented to you, you apply the relevant law, and move on. And for the life of me, I don't know how you would do it differently if you were a Republican or a Democrat.
So it's really just to give the two parties an opportunity to put their candidate forward, but really their political persuasion should not
I would hope it
come into play.
I would hope it would.
Because the judge is supposed to be impartial, right?
Exactly. It should not be a partisan, there should be no partisan influence on this. Probate judges are the only judges in Connecticut that are elected. I have not been able to find out. I've been trying to research it. It goes back to the 1850 amendment to the 1818 state constitution. Up to that point, all judges were appointed, and in this amendment in 1850, suddenly the probate judges are appointed by the electors.
And it's just in Connecticut?
All judges are appointed or are elected in some states, but in the majority of the states, judges are typically appointed.
That's a little quirky little thing,
isn't it?
So, what are the issues in this particular election?
Well, I think the issues basically boil down to this is an open seat. Judge Egan, who has served for many years in Ridgefield and then in the district once the consolidation happened in 2010, is retiring at this point. And I think it really boils down to who has the experience and qualifications which provide the most solid basis for being a judge, and then a sense of what qualities, what personal qualities does the judge bring that would seem to the voter to be the kind of situation where if you were ever in one of these awful situations that brought you into probate court, that somebody that you would like hearing your case. Yeah. I do think it's fair to consider that I would do this as a full-time basis. I would close my office.
Yeah. So you said that earlier. You would close your office. So it would, there's a lot involved in that, right? I mean, you've had.
Yeah. As I was looking around, I was thinking, what would I do with all of this stuff? For one thing, but
that's a big deal. You've been there 28 years.
Yeah. Well, I actually haven't been in that building for 28 years, but I've been at it for 28 years, and it is a big deal. But you know, unlike other judges, probate judges are allowed to continue practice so long as their practice does not conflict in any way with the role as judge. Much of my practice has the potential on any given day to be a conflict.
So is that why you would do it? Because it'd be a conflict of interest?
That's certainly one of the reasons, but really the bigger reason for me is this is a big district. It's 80-some thousand people, and I think it deserves the full-time attention of a judge. And I'm fortunate to be in a position where you know, I would be able to do that, and that's just the way I would like to do it if I have the good fortune to be elected.
So now, where do you anticipate it being a challenge?
The campaign being a challenge, or serving as a judge being a challenge?
Let's start with the campaign and then serving as a judge.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm self-funding, so I'm finding that a bit of a challenge. And certainly it puts me at a bit of a political disadvantage. I wouldn't change anything about it.
So you won't accept any?
I do not accept any contributions at all.
Okay.
The other challenge is this is a big district. The 4 towns are big, and being able to get out and meet as many people as I can is pretty tough. And I'm going out every day. I am knocking on doors. I'm going to events that I can get to. And
I saw you at the dump in Bethel.
you saw me at the dump in Bethel. Yeah, I'm
I was
pretty
like
much
on a mission to do my garbage. And I was like,
point,
oh, yeah.
At this point, I'm pretty much an expert on all 4 dumps, or recycling centers, as they like to be called, or transfer stations. You know, I'm out in front of Dunkin' Donuts and grocery stores, and I was at a giant pumpkin way off in Ridgefield yesterday, and you know, there are a lot of folks to meet, and it's hard to meet them all, and so I'm finding that to be a bit of a challenge.
So, anything else you want to share in terms of what you think differentiates you? We've got about 2 minutes.
Well, certainly for the petitioning candidate, I have substantially more experience in all courts, simply because I've been practicing much longer. For the Republican candidate, again, I think the real distinguishing quality is that you know, there's a big difference between telling somebody to go do something and actually doing it. And I'm the one who's been doing it for all these years. And I'm well known across the state. I'm well regarded, I believe. I am frequently asked to train other lawyers and judges in these areas.
So the fact that you're well known across the state, how does that affect and impact how you're practicing within this district?
Well, and specifically how I practice within this district, probably not a great deal, but I think it would bring some credibility to myself in the role in the office. Other lawyers certainly recognize my expertise. I think that there are a fair number of folks out there who might come before the court who recognize my expertise, and I think that can only be beneficial. So
if somebody had a question, or they just wanted to find out more about what we've talked about tonight, how might they reach you?
Well, if they have access to a computer and they were to go to dornfeldforprobate.com, it will actually take you to my Facebook page, which has quite a lot of information about me. My computer science son set this up, and they certainly could also message me with any questions. I'd be happy to respond. They're welcome to call me at my office at 203-748-3363.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to speak with them. I'd be happy to meet with them, whatever they would like.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming on the show, Sharon.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right, I'm Susan Shaner with Community Forum. Until next time, thanks for joining us.